Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the EPZ K5. So this is a model that's actually been around for a little while. I've had it on my desk for a little while. What hasn't been around for all that long are their new M100 liquid silicone tips. So liquid silicone tips, for those of you who are unfamiliar, tend to look a lot like this, whether it's from EPZ or not. Very clear, very thin silicone style tips. And what tends to be the magic on liquid silicone tips is they use a silicone that, when is inserted into your ear and your body heat, tends to allow it to conform better to the curves of your ear canal. So you kind of get a more slightly customized fit because of the heat, and they call it liquid silicone, and it just kind of heats it up enough so that it will deform better to the curves of your canal. And that's kind of the liquid silicone, or the liquid part of the liquid silicone name. So cool tips. EPZ has their own. There's other brands who have their own, but that is, and generally, that's what I would say the rationale or the design goal behind such tips and calling them liquid silicone is just a slightly better, slightly more conforming fit for those of you who like that tighter fit in your ear canal. So what I will say is the sizes are actually on the larger size, which actually surprised me. So this is the large, this is the medium. The large is actually quite large. And for those of you who are into the size of actual large tips, and I have to know that they're 13 millimeters or 14 millimeters, do look at the chart online before you buy the M100s. I think they do specify all the sizes. But yeah, I thought I actually checked a while back, and I didn't actually anticipate the large being that large. It actually is very much a very large tip compared to the medium, which is probably going to be the large on some other brands. So do check those out. If you're into larger tips, these will be very helpful for you. If you're trying to figure out which size, you're going to have to go back to their listing and figure out which size you're going to purchase anyway. So that is the tips. This is the K5. So this is a 1+4. There is an 8 millimeter dynamic driver in there. There are 4 balanced armatures. There is a dynamic driver down there. 4 balanced armatures right there. So very nice. As usual, EPZ does a very high quality build. The K5 is no different. This one's about $110. For that price, you do get a nice copper colored modular cable. So this one is modular. This little guy pops out. You get, so very nice cable. The other modular connectors are actually in the EPZ case, which is also very nice. So quite a nice package. The M100s don't come with the K5. As far as I know, those will be an additional purchase. But yeah, very nice. Again, I would say that because of the sizing of them and the style of liquid silicone, that's kind of a preference thing. Some people well, those are very appealing, and some people are not. The size of the tip will work better with some sets, whereas it will not fit with some others. And actually, in particular with the K5, these tips didn't actually work for me, and we'll talk about that in a second. So what is the K5? Again, as I said, it's an 8 millimeter dynamic driver, 4 balanced armatures. The signature is like this. It is another V shape with a late rise in the treble, very similar to a set that I just talked about, the RA15 from RA Audio. They both do a very similar curve. So this kind of nice arcing bass shelf to provide a nice low end without too much sub bass. And then you get this rise that's sort of like Harman, and then you kind of fly off the Harman in the later treble, and it gives you kind of a boost. You try to keep this shout free, shout less, and easier going upper mid, and then add a little more detail and energy on the upper treble, and that's kind of exactly what they did here. So it is another V-shaped set with a late peak, as I said, less shout, and there's a later emphasis with enough bass, and all those things kind of all work together quite nicely. I do think K5 poked in a bit more mid energy to prevent that hollowed out upper mid that you heard on RA15, and lowered the bass to prevent falling under the bass and V-shaped problems. So that was one of the things on RA15 that was actually difficult to for them to actually tune that in that way. So RA15 in the blue had kind of more of a mid bass. There was more of a bass presence, and that sort of created more of a V shape where the mids were going to be behind the bass a little bit. Then they added a lot more energy in the upper treble, and then again, that kind of went in front of the mids, and the mids kind of fell back in that way. And I think EPZ and K5 actually got this balance right, so the mids don't really sound as far back. They added a little bit more energy here, kind of cut that one off a little short, so there's, again, no shout, a little more energy so it doesn't sound hollow. cut it a little short here so there's no shout, and just add a little bit extra on the upper treble, so you kind of get that same kind of tuning, but done with maybe a more balanced version, or the version that worked better with their balanced armatures. But either way, I think EPZ did a better job at balancing the bass to treble through the mids and avoiding some of the V-shaped problems that popped up on RA15. So also, I would say, again, what I was talking about with the tips is shallow fit doesn't really work on this one. And a lot of it is this. It's these pickiness out there. So shallow fit, if you're leaking a little bass, like if you don't have these pushed in quite far, you're going to get kind of a shrilly sound to it. It's going to sound very bright, and shrill is probably what it sounds like. But you do have to push these in quite deep. And as you can see with these tips, and you can kind of see it here, there's kind of an extension. The nozzle is about right here, and then the top of the tip is right here. So that little bit of extra that doesn't let you push it in all the way into your ear canal, that is going to work on some sets. It didn't particularly work for me on K5 for that exact reason. Is this set, this tuning with my ears needs to sit a lot deeper. And when it sits deeper, you get a more bass presence and a less of a peaky presence. So yeah, I would say I like the tips. I just didn't like them on this particular set for that reason. It tended to give me more of a shallow fit as opposed to a deeper fit, which is where this set actually sounded better to me. So the K5 versus the RA15, which I just reviewed, that's $110 versus $90. I do think that K5 has the advantage of balanced armatures and resolution with a very similar tuning, and that was one of my major nitpicks with the RA15. One nozzle was warm and not quite resolving enough. One was more resolving but brighter, and I think K5 is the better balance between bass and brightness and resolve, and balanced armatures certainly are one way to give you a more resolving sound. And I think EPZ got the tuning and the drivers, and I think it's a better example of this style tuning done slightly better for not that much more money. So the bass on this one, yeah, I think this is another arc style. But it's more conservative, as I said. Definitely, it has a very similar arc to it. It still has some mid bass, but not quite as heavy as RA15. And they both kind of end up in the sub bass, so not an overly heavy sub bass presence. And I think they got that quite right. It definitely sounds better than RA15, and I think a lot of that is the 8mm driver. RA15 was a 10mm driver. There's just more of a bass presence. The 8mm brought it down that level, something I complained about on RA15. Just bring that down a little bit. You don't have those mids falling back behind the bass, and everything sounds a little bit more balanced. So yeah, I think they got a decent split between the sub bass and the mid bass and the 8mm. I think a lot goes right on K5 with respect to those. So why does the sub bass look rolled off? And again, if you look at it here, it kind of looks normal because you have RA15. But if you look at it against other sets, I would say it looks like it dips a little bit. And it dips a little bit because K5 doesn't have this bump out here. So a heavy sub bass presence will actually mask a lot of the airiness out here. So you roll this down just a little bit so you don't have this dominant sub bass presence. You don't have to do an upper treble air boost, and that's exactly how K5 achieved an airy sound without having a huge boost out there. So yeah, props to them. Yeah, they actually got that done right. It's a really nice balance. The warning I will say, it doesn't really work at low volume. So if you have low volume, you're not going to get a whole lot of air because that's a pretty low level in air, kind of in that region. So a lower volume is going to sound quite low, but at kind of medium volume, I think that was actually done quite well. And the treble, I think the fit is huge here. As I said, that shallow fit will be bright and almost shrill. A deeper fit will sound less peaky, but it's still elevated later. It's still elevated later than a Harman set, kind of more than elevated a little bit later than you were expecting if you're used to Harman sets. And I do think that EPZ pulled off a really delicate balance, exactly what I was talking about. That sub bass, 5K, and air region, they actually got that tuning and balance down pretty well. It's kind of surprising how well it actually works. Again, with deeper fit, those of you who've tried K5 and you hear it kind of bright and peaky, I understand that. It's very much a fit thing. You have to get this thing deeper so those peaks don't come across as peaky as they look. But yeah, I do think that tuning-wise, and driver-wise, I think they actually pulled off a really nice balance there without doubling down on kind of a bright spot out there. And the mids, without that with a better bass setup, better treble setup. The mids are tuned and technically better with 4 balanced armatures. Again, I think all the things that I nitpicked about with RA15, I think EPZ actually got them right. Switching to the 8mm dynamic driver works because the mids don't fall too far behind the bass. Keeps the bass from overstepping too much into the mids, but still provides a complementary low end and nice lower mids. Upper mids and treble will be heavily dependent on your music. And again, kind of the same thing with RA15. If your music, like snare drums, are going to hammer this part really hard, it is still going to sound quite bright, definitely brighter than maybe you were expecting, brighter than a Harman set, which kind of rolled this bit off. But if you can avoid that, it'll actually sound quite nice and balanced. So stage, again, it's a little bit better than the graph looks, especially if you're getting the fit right because there was a proper amount of bass. The treble isn't too peaky and flattening the stage. Bad fit will be bad stage is kind of what I just said. So that is what I got on the EPZ K5. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.